Welcome, everybody, to episode 12 of Barbarian Banter. I'm your host, Jonas Kilker.
And I'm Dane Millerhaus here for episode 12. Wow, it's exciting how many we already have down.
Absolutely. Our guest today is a philosopher, content creator, author, and writer for the journal Pater, who is on a quest to perhaps save the fall of the West through the practice and religion of solar idealism. His account is called Caffeine and Philosophy, and he is a philosopher in every sense of the word. Welcome, CB.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to meet you
Absolutely,
both.
man. It is a pleasure. This is the first time that we're like really getting to meet face to face. And I have been like binging some of your podcasts though, so it does feel like I've been hanging out with you for a few days straight.
Oh, lovely. I love being able to give that impression, especially after enjoying it at other people's sometimes post-mortem expense in the past. So,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, one thing that I was like super curious about because I got a follow from I think his name is Jack,
Mhm.
who is the sort of like founder of the Order of Fire. Is that right?
Yes. Mhm.
Super cool. Yeah, he followed me. I think it was after the video that I had made about Apollo and Christ and like solar worship and that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
so when I saw the whole like solar idealism thing, because you and I had been following each other for a little bit, I was kind of like immediately thought that it maybe had something to do with actual sun worship. But then as I started kind of like looking into it and deeper, like I realized it was much more of a sort of like structured philosophy. And come to find out, I watched your guys' podcast where you're talking about how it is more religious than it is spiritual, which I found really interesting because obviously most people they tend to veer away from religion for the sake of the spiritual and these sorts of things because like religion has that sort of negative connotation to it sometimes.
You might have
So
you might have seen the meme that he was pushing the religious not spiritual, which is the
I yeah,
it's not entirely serious, but it's making fun of the people who say that they're spiritual but not religious. Um,
exactly.
because so much of when you get down into it, a lot of what religion is really is just discipline.
Yeah.
And discipline towards what is the question. So like you can be spiritual but not religious, I suppose. But
Right.
I think of spirituality as connection with the spirit. So which
Hmm.
spirit are you connected to, and what discipline are you doing, or are you employing to maintain and develop that? And if someone says they're spiritual but not religious, it's a fancy way of saying I'm connected to something, but I don't know what, and I'm not disciplined. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of times they're just trying to say I think I'm interesting.
You
You
know,
know?
Or
it's
I'm interested. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure in which direction.
it's something I heard a lot growing up actually was the spiritual not religious and was even told that that's what I should pursue faith-wise was to approach spiritual matters spiritual, not religious, not given to religious dogma or do customs or practices for the sake of doing them, but rather some kind of spiritual sense. And growing up, it kind of made sense, but now I seeing it from the other way, it's kind of like I see the perspective of having structure and things you actually do and having set practices, that kind of discipline you talk about. Because a lot of people do say, "Oh, I'm spiritual," and it's like, "Oh, well, what does that mean? Like, what are
Hmm.
is it just you believe in something spiritual? Like, oh yeah, I believe there's a god, or I believe there's gods. You know,
Yeah. I think
things
people
need
have
form.
a kind of instinctive aversion to being purely mechanistic material beings.
Hmm.
There's something kind of gross in that way of looking at the world, and so they saying that you're spiritual. I think if we're to be charitable, is them trying to say, well, I'm not that. Maybe I don't know anything else, but at least I'm not that. Um, it's sort of undeveloped, but at least it's a healthy instinct, perhaps. It's easy to make fun of because I think a lot of that is weaponized against institutional religions. And there's some good
Hmm.
reason to be distrustful of institutions, but that doesn't mean that they aren't useful. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that they don't have a place. And the fact that institutions become corrupt does not mean they're therefore on the whole bad and to be avoided, and don't have their place.
Yeah, I think of it kind of akin to the idea that guns don't kill people, people kill people, but they use guns. In the same way that, like, you can't, like, it's not necessarily that institutions corrupt people, but people corrupt others through the means of institutions, because that's sort of, it's much easier for the Catholic Church to corrupt, for example, as opposed to just one Catholic guy. He's not going to really do much change or damage in the world. But I do think it's interesting that, like, and I think I would like to just have you, for the audience, sort of explain what the sort of core tenets are of solar idealism, because I am fascinated about that idea of the distinction between spirituality and religion.
Sure. So, solar idealism, um, you know, many young men who are, well, shall we say, spiritually adrift, they try out
Hmm.
different things. Oh, let's try being Catholic for a little while. Many people try paganism, especially like northern Nordic paganism,
Yeah.
Austria, that kind of thing. Um, Having spent some time in that world, it has a very dark, very black metal vibe. It's very reactive,
Mm.
almost satanic. Not in the sense of being evil, but in the sense of being reactive. In the sense of being,
Against Christianity.
yes, and in that sense of satanic, there's actually, this will sound a little bit paradoxical, but I think there's actually satanic Christians out there, especially
Hmm.
the new convert orthobros and traditionalist Catholics who adopt a very stark black and white aesthetic with lots of skulls. You might
Yep.
have seen the vibe.
Sure, sure.
It's more about being reactive and against the world than it is
Hmm.
about being for something. And a lot of paganism is like that.
Right.
It
Okay.
just happens to be against Christianity and other things, but um, it can go the other way. So Jack Donovan, who was also kind of involved in that, this is not healthy, good. It's not mature. So
Okay.
what is an alternative to paganism that is not Christianity, that is positive?
Hmm.
And solar idealism, it didn't begin as a philosophy, as I think most good movements don't. I was once interviewing a friend who was involved in the anarcho-primitivist movement back in the 90s, and
Interesting.
I asked him, which philosopher really started it? Was it Theodore Kaczynski? Was it John Zerzan? Was it, like, second and third order generation followers of Heidegger and J.R. Tolkien? He said, no, actually, it was an offshoot of punk music. It was
Mm.
music that started it, and then philosophers came to provide justification and rationalization afterwards. And there's
Yeah.
something, I think, correct about art leading the way. And so it really began with a positive solar aesthetic vision, like as basic as a color palette shift, from
Sure.
black, white, red to oranges and browns of the earth, sunrise, sunset, but something that we're creating. And I've tried to give some more philosophical explanations of what it is that's happening,
Hmm.
in the movement, what we're trying to do. We have been faced in the last 70, 80 years or so with this sort of collapse of meaning in the West. We've hit this sort of postmodern moment
Yeah.
that Nietzsche sort of warned about, and Camus, in a very noble way, attempted to deal with his absurdism. Like, well,
Absurdism. Yeah.
what if we can face
Laugh
the
about it.
meaninglessness, but smile and
Yeah.
create our own meaning in this way? And solar idealism is beginning with many myths and stuff of the past, especially of the Indic and Germanic and Greek and Roman tradition, but not exclusively. The sort
Hmm.
of core texts that we've been working from have been Gilgamesh, the Rig Veda, Homer, but Virgil is there as well, Beowulf is there as well. There's a lot of things we can draw from, and
Right.
basically the way Jack Donovan put it in his book Fire in the Dark is we are looking back throughout all of history as if from Odin's throne, so the
Hmm.
Hlidskjalf, the shelf throne, and we can see all of the past with more or less precision,
Sure.
And in the face of comparing all of these things, the magic of each one relative to each other sort of evaporates. And so, what do
Hmm.
you? But you can't not choose. You can't not live a certain way. And
Yeah.
so, the question is, what do we do in the face of this meaninglessness that I think the Enlightenment was a big part of the problem that led us here. This drive for objectivity and
Yeah.
truth in this very heavy, grand sense of the word, this capital T truth that actually crushes and destroys all myths as its goal. Um,
Right.
but if you reject that goal, and if you reject the myth that undergirds the goal, then all of the rest of the myths actually come back on the table as legitimate. Um, Now we can't revive traditions that have died, but
Right.
we can make new ones in the way that all the other ones in the past were made. And
Hmm.
it turns out that myths, in the sense of sacred stories, not true or false, but the stories, not stories to believe in, but stories to live by, like Santa
Right.
Claus, for example,
Hmm.
can be just as serious as asserted scientific truths.
Hmm.
And just because we gave the description, the name to them, does not mean that we created them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the meaning we ascribe to them can be a serious religious framework and a guide for our lives.
I like that. It's kind of like, in a sense, it's like the sort of perennialist philosophy where there's like a through line between all of these myths, which
Mm-hmm.
is something that I'm actually like a believer in, is that, myths exist for a reason. And whether it's something as simple as trying to teach us an abstract truth that can't always be readily available to you at any given time, you can understand, you can gain wisdom from something more abstractly through a myth or a folk tale or something. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, if you are having these sort of resonating truths in all different cultures that are sort of arriving at some sort of common truth or common story, then it's like you are touching on something akin to absolute truth, whatever, to whatever degree we might think that that exists or not,
Yeah, or have access to. And
or have access to.
it's tricky because there is a danger here of there's a British theologian named John Hick. He's the
Hmm.
founder of what's called pluralism, and
Okay.
his philosophy, you could boil it down to the blind men feeling up an elephant.
That's what
So
I was almost going
sort
to
of,
say when I said touching on truth. Yeah.
yeah, and there's definitely something to that because we do have perspectives and biases that warp how we see the world, and we can kind of triangulate new truths, especially looking back in history. This is one of Curtis
Right.
Yarvin's great um, ideas. But there is a problem in his view as well, which is that he basically requires us to take all revelation seriously, but not literally.
Hmm.
Because the instances of revelation, the sacred books, actually do conflict with each other. And
Sure.
not just in a matter of facts, but in the matter of values as well. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
there is a story that Nietzsche tells in The Birth of Tragedy about it's an ancient Greek story about the wisdom of Silenus. Who's the king who turns everything to gold? Is it Midas?
It's
Midas.
Midas.
I might be thinking of a different name. One of the kings manages to capture this centaur god deity spirit thing named Silenus.
Hmm.
And he says, Silenus, tell me what is best in life, basically. It's the Conan question, except Silenus doesn't
Hmm.
give the Conan answer. He
Yeah.
says, mortal, born to suffering, born for a day, you cannot have what is best because it has already escaped you. What would be best would be to never have been born. but second best is to die and die soon. That's his wisdom.
Sounds like
Kind of
Paul
dark.
almost.
Sounds like what?
Paul.
Or
The,
Ecclesiastes.
yeah, it sounds like the Apostle
Yeah.
Paul. The idea that I would much rather die and be with my Lord, but it is better that I'm here with you. You know.
Yeah. And what Nietzsche argues is that the way the Greeks depicted their pantheon of the gods, and especially Homer, as these very almost soap opera characters. There's so much drama, there's
Very
infidelity, there's petty.
animated.
He says what that is it is an absolute refutation of the wisdom of Silenus. He says life is so good that even the gods want to live it. It
Right.
down to the dirty, messy, obnoxious, petty details. Even the gods want to do it. And it's one of the great things about the 2007 movie Troy.
I was
The,
just gonna say
the
when
line where
Achilles says, yeah, that
the
the
gods
gods
envy us.
envy us.
That is not from Homer, but it
I
could
know.
have been. It could have been.
It could have been.
Great
Yeah.
addition from whoever directed that.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, so like there are religious traditions that hold more or less to that not just anti-natal but anti-life kind of ethos of silence. Certain strains of Buddhism, I think certain strains of Hinduism, many Gnostic and Manichaean strains all lean towards the material is evil and we would be better off escaping it to the world of pure spirit and unity with the oneness. But of course,
Right.
the dissolution of self-identity is just death. So it's a longing for death. And there are other religions that say, no, life is actually wonderful. and those two religions, I mean, they might both convey truths about the human experience, but it's very difficult to reconcile those two truths.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan. Did you have?
Yeah, I think for one, it's fascinating, everything you've stated so far, and I think a lot of it powerfully resonates with me and kind of my outlook on things, specifically to what you just said about the reconciliation, these two truths about the human condition. One of my things I always try to navigate is these different dualities and paradoxical aspects of existence, because it really doesn't all, at least from my perspective, line up neatly. There's no neat way to tie it in a bow and say this is life, this is the meaning of life. There's different forces that oppose, but that kind of creates, in a sense, that opposing kind of creates the structure, almost like two poles lean on each other. The tension, yes.
The tension creates the beauty.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The contrast of life and death, all these things. So certainly, I think there is definitely a way where you can say these two very different faiths that have a very different opinion on life are both speaking to some truth, just not the whole truth. And I don't know if we could ever describe the whole truth without saying both perspectives.
So truth is an interesting question on its own too, because there's I mean, not to go all Heidegger, but the truth as we have deployed it from the German is usually a translation from this Greek word aletheia, which is a very complex word. And it's used extensively throughout Plato and Socrates' Apology and stuff. But it really acquired a great deal of baggage with Parmenides. And in this old sense of this word truth, of aletheia, which means that which is uncovered. Lethe meaning like oblivion or forgetfulness. Think of like the river Lethe. And the negating a prefix is not. So it's almost like I'm remembering something. It's almost like I'm unforgetting something.
Right.
And I'm uncovering, undisclosing something.
Yeah,
that was
sort of a
covered over.
Socratic view of truth
Well, in the sense of
in like the
what
Meno.
Socrates, yes, believed truth to be, which is not just a discrete fact which it happens to be true,
Hmm.
but the truth in its uncontingent, unchanging, holistic totality.
Right.
And that is the sense of this word truth. It's like always like capital T truth. That
Hmm.
is implied by this word aletheia, as opposed to, if my Greek is correct, something like toeon, or simply what is. Um,
Right.
if we
Like
say,
fact.
yeah, if we say there's a rock over there, like we don't say the presence of a rock over there is the truth.
Yeah.
It's like no, it just is. There's a rock there. Um, there's also the sense of saying, oh, there's a rock over there. He said there's a rock over there. He spoke the truth. So there's a
Uh-huh.
sense of truth, and I think this is more
In
the
that, yeah.
Proto-Germanic, that is
Hmm.
in reference to what someone has said. So,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of conflation between these categories of things, these different concepts that happens with this single word, and so much of philosophy, and this is why I've been nerding out on poetry and art in the last few months, is you quickly discover the limits of where philosophy can get you,
Yeah.
to these places. It's great at unraveling other people's ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, no,
but
I was even writing today. I was writing a script about why essay writing is so important because it sort of helps you take all of your abstract, like symbolic ideas that you could maybe turn into art, and then you try and make them into something precise and coherent through words. But that is like the nature of language, is to structure
Mhm.
things into something that's so rigid that you can't really get away from. You almost turn something that is abstract into something that's either true or false, right? Your words. But it's
Yes.
like maybe the idea is like you can't say that a painting or a song is true or false, but you can take words and now you can add a truth value to them.
Yes, absolutely. And these words can work in a particular context. If I'm describing something
Mm,
to you, or if you're describing something to me, but 100 years from now, the meaning of those words might have changed, or just
right.
repeating the word to the same person, the repetition might change it.
Yeah.
And
The
the
myth starts to grow.
yes, and the mercurial nature of language itself makes it a tricky medium to do metaphysics with, to get
Yeah.
to the truth, to get to like the noumenon, to borrow Kantian
Yeah.
language. It's like,
That kind of idea of whether or not language precedes reality or existence or the other way around.
mhm. I mean, I'm partial to the idea that language describes reality, and that
Yeah.
reality precedes language, and we just try to
Uh-huh.
describe it. Um, but that's the beauty of poetry, um, maybe above, not against, but above and prior to philosophy. Um,
Hmm.
I am not of the opinion that philosophy exploded out of Greece because the Greeks were just so much smarter than everyone else.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I, I'm I'm more inclined to believe it was because they had this tradition of written dithyrambic tragedies and poetry, that created so much language to work with, and then philosophy was made possible by
Right.
the poetry.
Yeah, I've always thought it fascinating that like the Greeks have like, nine different words for love, for example, because there's so many different kinds of love and you could
Mm-hmm.
describe it in different ways. And in that sense, like it's really easy to do poetry with. And that's also why you made a video a while ago I really liked where you're talking about your favorite translations of Homer, and you're
Oh
like, well,
yes.
there's no good translations of Homer. Like, there's just some that are better than others because in the modern English language, like, how can you truly capture the tone and the essence and the rhythm of Homeric, the pentameter? Like, it's not possible,
Do you
So you can only get your best approximation of it.
do you guys follow that I forget his name. It's like Narum something. He's this redheaded guy who does all that
Yes.
language autistic stuff.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
He got into this poetry contest with a philosopher on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, so I didn't see the other guy's
I
version.
think I saw a
I
little
saw a
bit of
little bit of
this.
His
this.
his poem was so good, and his presentation of it was so good. Imagine trying to read that without his rhythm, without his
Hmm.
without his cadence. It
It
just
wouldn't land.
wouldn't be the same. And
Yeah.
I've been teaching Homer now for about 2.5 years, in like groups. I have this 2 year curriculum. One group that's passed through all the way, a second group that's about halfway, a little over halfway through,
Very
and
cool.
they read different translations. I have them go through two different, and it's funny hearing the people read, Fagles or Green
Hmm.
or Fitzgerald or something, and then they'll hit Lattimore. Lattimore is like the widely considered to be the most scholarly, the most precise, and whatever. And
Mm.
it's just so sluggish. It is
Yeah.
difficult to wade through that. And at the same time, I've been kind of doing my part in criticizing Emily Wilson's very subversive
We have done it in
translation.
about 3 different episodes here, so
Oh, good. Okay, yeah.
yeah.
I've been criticizing her for about a year. I finally started reading her, and I have to say, on every other page, I find another very subtle little subversive little tidbit she throws in. Like in book two, she adds the line, "It's not fair," to Telemachus's voice, and it's like, in English,
Huh.
that has a very bratty connotation. Nothing like
Yes.
that is in the Greek. No other
Hmm.
translator comes up with anything like that line. She just slips it in, and it's
Yeah.
like just leaves the audience to sort of like ingrain that into their impression of Telemachus's character on their own. Very, very
Yeah.
sneaky,
It's
subversive
very
stuff.
subtle. Yeah. It's not
But
something where you're removing a whole chapter or something. Like people
yeah,
are not going to notice for the
she's
most
very
part.
good at it. But
Hmm.
she's also very good at translating. I have to give it to her.
Mm.
Her meter is very readable. It flows very nicely. It's in that
Mm-hmm.
she did the whole thing in meter, iambic pentameter. Um,
Interesting.
I'm waiting for someone to do a Homeric translation in anapestic tetrameter, the Dr. Zeus rhythm.
Oh, how funny.
Should be funny.
That's funny.
But
Yeah.
I did have one student who, I shouldn't call him a student. He's like about as knowledgeable as me now. But he did his
A
translation
pupil.
of Homer section at the end of the 2 year curriculum. We do our own translations, and he did a
Oh,
line from
super
the
cool.
Iliad of the one of the battle scenes depicting a man falling like an oak or a mountain pine, and
Mm.
he did that in English in the full dactylic hexameter, and it
Mm.
worked. And he was very unimpressed after that with every poet who did not do dactylic hexameter. I'm like, I think it's pretty hard, but he
Yeah.
said it was easy. So
You know,
Interesting.
it's kind of this discussion of poetry and kind of art versus philosophies. Interesting. A lot of the time, I get asked if I either get called a philosopher or get asked if I'm trying to be a philosopher, which I'm not, and I'm not classically trained in philosophy for one.
neither am I.
I'm no by no means an expert or even trying to be a philosopher or a student of philosophy in the academic rigor sense.
You're
But
just born as one.
I and if I had to choose between if I could be what I want to be, I don't want to call myself a poet or an artist necessarily. That feels a little pretentious to say for what I do, but I would much rather be that would be my ideal form is to be a poet or an artist over a philosopher. To me, there's something a lot more moving and powerful about art. Not that I don't enjoy philosophy and philosophize. Geez, tongue's not working well. So much for me being a poet. But
You're a poet, not a bard.
sometimes when I'm reading philosophy and it gets a little sloggy and I understand the concepts, but sometimes I get a little like, okay, grounded in some imagery for how do I take this and bring it into the world? And then I see, a work of art, a painting, even edits. I think edits are an underrated art form in the modern era. There's
Sure.
obviously a lot of very crappy edits, just lights and sounds thrown together. But I think there's some that are truly sublime in a way that words could not be, that music and imagery only could be. And to me, that goes further. At least for someone like myself, I think it goes further than long-winded technical explanations.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
that that's why like novel is a great sort of what would you say, mechanism for conveying philosophy. Like that's why people love C.S. Lewis so much or J.R.R. Tolkien, because these guys are able to sort of infuse their stories, their fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, with philosophy. You know, it's easier to
Storytelling
read.
is
It's
so
like,
fundamental
yeah, it's, I mean,
to
like even
mankind.
Plato was doing that to a degree.
Oh, more than to a degree. I mean,
Yeah.
they say all roads lead to Rome, and all philosophical, bushwhacked pathways eventually lead back to Plato's Republic.
Yes.
At the end of the day, and it's every time I read that book, the one bit of real, I can't pretend I haven't had some formal philosophical training.
Hmm.
Years and years
Clearly.
ago, I did
No
take some
offense.
classes. I didn't take a lot, but the one for I did take one of Dr. Michael Millerman's courses on Plato last year. Wonderful, wonderful experience. Cannot recommend him highly enough if you can afford it. Very worthwhile. Every time I went into that class quite familiar with Plato,
Hmm.
and I came out with a completely different impression. Um, and it wasn't the one that Millerman intended. It's just one of those books like the Bible or Homer, or Beowulf. Any of these great books, they have layers to them that are kind of a bottomless well, and
Yeah.
it is extraordinary how thoroughly
Hmm.
Plato not just thought of everything, but layered it all in such that there was a superficial, easy initial layer of understanding, and then there's deeper and deeper layers of understanding underneath all of that.
Yeah.
Um, and and he did it in a very poetic manner. Like I'm currently working through Heidegger's Being in Time for a
You're a
second
soldier
time.
for that.
It is the toughest book I've ever tried to read.
Me
And
too.
I've read Joyce. It's not fun. It is worthwhile, I think.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's
I think it was
extremely
some of the
difficult.
greatest essays that I ever wrote were on a class where we read Being in Time. And as we were going through it, yeah, like the entire class was Heidegger's Being in Time. Like that was the name of it.
Wow.
And we just, it was like one of those things where week one, I was like, okay, cool, like breaking it down, this could be interesting. Week two, it was starting to like really slug through things. Week three, I'm like, I can't show up to this class. Like there's no way I can do this. And then, you know, I had a great professor and he was able to explain things in a way where I was able to engage with the text. And then by the end of it, by like week 10, week 11, when we're writing our finals and stuff, I felt like I was writing like my best papers about Heidegger. And like I've referenced the idea of Dasein and being towards death and all of
Nice.
these things like so many times in my videos. Like it's one of those things where I was like, in week three of reading it, I'm like, I'm never gonna use this in my life. Like, I'm never gonna fall back to Heidegger. This book is incredibly dense. But now that I've actually gotten through it and understood it on a first pass to some basic level, like I'm like, I think about this every day.
Yeah.
You know,
It
that's the beauty of
changes
a good work of philosophy.
it changes how you think. And going back to Dane's point about sort of philosophy versus art, I like to think of it as sort of a triangle of fences with equally green pastures on each side,
Hmm.
where the artists are always starving for money and are envious of the businessmen. And then businessmen reach a certain level of success. They become Andrew Tate's, they become George Soros's, become, and they wish that they had been philosophers. And I remember reading George Soros's book, The Alchemy of Finance, and it was amusing because it's like this is one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the world, and you can sense in this book that like he doesn't seem to have cared about that all that much. He really wishes he had been a philosopher.
Yeah.
and
Well,
then,
I mean,
but then
yeah.
you go far enough in philosophy, and you're like, well, this is not really creating as much as I thought it would. I wish I could create something that grows. Like, pick up a guitar or something. You
There's
want to be an
literally my
artist
life
again.
story. Like
Yeah,
because I did pull the trigger on a degree in philosophy. I have a bachelor's from UCLA,
very nice.
and it was so funny. Like when I was at school, and like you meet people, they're like, what's your major?" And you're like, "Philosophy." And then they're either going to like tear you to shreds, say that you're a moron, you're never going to get a job or anything like that, or they're just like, "Oh, that's awesome. I wish I could study philosophy." You know what
You
I mean?
can.
And it's like you can, yeah. But because everybody's got this idea that like if they get a degree in philosophy, they're never going to be able to get a real job. Then like they're like, well, I should do the smart thing and opt for the business degree, which in my
Anthropic is
opinion
hiring
is
now.
just as fake. Yeah,
Anthropic is
As
replacing
a
all the
business
AI.
major, it
Oh.
is just as fake, honestly.
it is just as fake.
Well, they're
Yeah.
hiring all the philosophers now.
Um,
They've got like a bunch of pros in there now, and by pros I mean people with degrees. I don't know. If that means they're a real
it's
philosopher or not.
funny you mention like George Soros and business guys who want to go be philosophers and pontificate. You see this now that podcasting's such a big thing. All these powerful, wealthy people are wanting to become podcasters and start their own pod. You've got guys high ranking in government who want to have their own podcast. You've got big businessmen who they want to pontificate on Twitter. They want to share their wisdom. I don't wisdom maybe depending on your perspective. But it's interesting how they all, like you said, want to kind of become philosophers in a sense, even if they're not saying they want to become philosophers. That's
They want
what
to.
they want to do. They want to
agora.
impart meaning
Yeah.
on life and on pupils.
Well, I don't know if you guys have the same experience. I worked at Microsoft for about 6 months, or rather a subsidiary on Microsoft campus doing CRM, database management, that kind of thing. And there's an incredible shallowness there. And many of even the higher tier business people, not like the top people, but like the upper echelons of management are pardon the insulting language, but kind of vacuous and kind of empty. And I don't think they're that way by choice. I think they feel that they have to
It's
be.
the nature of the job.
Yeah, and I think that really gets to people. I think it feels very ghostly, and they want depth. They want more than just number go up,
Right.
And there is something like that in philosophy. It is one of the supreme joys of reading Plato. It's like a magic spell. You're overcome with this powerful sense of an expansion of your inner world.
Right.
That is very pleasurable. It makes
Yeah, it's leaving
world...
the cave.
Yeah, well, and it's as he enjoins leaving the cave and then coming back down to the cave and seeing it differently, seeing the shadows differently, and being able to talk about the shadows differently and more intelligently, and because you're not supposed to dwell in the world of the light. You do need to go back down into the cave.
It's your duty.
Right, and it's very. My uncle said it makes your head a more interesting place to live in, just like working out makes your body a more interesting vehicle to drive. And it just makes life better, and there's intrinsic value in that, because if you have all the money in the world, but you're out of shape and kind of boring and surrounded by boring people, like what's that money gonna buy you?
What's the yeah what's exactly the point? Is like I was in my Patreon group, I've got a Discord where we do a book club, and the book that we're reading right now is Paralandra by C.S. Lewis. You're familiar with it?
I have not read it. I've read a lot of C.S. Lewis. I haven't read that.
It's interesting. It's without spoiling too much, it's one of his sci-fi novels. It's part of a trilogy, and it's essentially the story of like the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve taking place on a different planet, sort of like God trying again in a sense. And how we could do things right. Should we? Is it even our place to intervene? That sort of thing. That's sort of the philosophical undertone. It's where we get this sort of idea of like the Catholic idea of Felix Peccatum Ade, the fortunate sin of Adam. Because like you were saying earlier, it's like that. And I even made this video like a few days ago. the fall is essentially what gives life its like true meaning. Like the gods envy us because we are mortal. Like death
Yes.
gives you that finality. Heidegger speaks of this. Death gives you that finality that you orient towards, and it gives your life meaning and these things. And yeah, where was I going with this? What did we just? I started thinking about Paralandra too much.
Intelligent books and being around intelligent people.
Oh, right. One of the big themes in that book is this idea that, like, when he's feeling far from God, or when he's feeling like sort of at odds with himself because he's on this new planet, like nothing is sort of normal for him. This idea of returning to a state of presence is sort of like his grounding, like salvific factor,
Hmm.
because in a sense, like, if you were to go the purely like not religious but spiritual route, a lot of those books are sort of touting like Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. It's this idea of like presence is the sort of escape from suffering because nothing's ever actually so bad in the moment. And I feel like that's the case if it actually is not so bad in the moment. But like, what if you're one of those people who, like you said, you're incredibly uninteresting? What if you've never like actually wrestled with philosophy in any way? You don't actually really know how to think. Your thoughts are boring maybe, and you distract yourself from these things with
Yeah.
social media, with the constant media, or the fact that you are completely unhealthy and your body is not actually a safe place to dwell, but you distract yourself by laying around all day, by sitting for 8 hours at your desk job and then coming home and sitting on the couch for more. We're constantly robbing ourselves of the ability to be present so that we don't have to face those things. And I think that you're right, like philosophy is that sort of thing that helps you. It makes your mind a playground instead of somewhere where you're afraid to dwell. Like if you can wrestle with the idea safely, it's an exciting place to dwell.
And it can also help you disentangle confused concepts. And this is one of the great
Hmm.
problems with Heidegger too. Is I love finding the history of the use of words. Do either of you know where the term red pill came from in like common parlance?
I did
I'm
at one
guessing from the
point because
Matrix.
I
It was
went down
borrowed
that rabbit hole,
by
but
a philosopher from the Matrix and applied to uh, the culture. I can say political
Hmm.
philosophy in particular. It was Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin started
Hmm.
talking about it as the
okay,
red pill,
that makes sense.
and
That
then
makes sense.
shortly afterwards, it was stolen by Nazis and pickup artists. And he's like, "Well, shoot, uh, that's not the
They
sense
do
I meant
that. They
it."
do that a lot.
Yeah. So
Well,
I
pickup
love
artists in the name.
I love finding like the history of the uses of these words, and Heidegger gave us so many different terms that have entered common parlance that people don't understand where they came from. One of
Right.
them is authenticity.
Hmm.
Authenticity is an interesting word because um, in English, it has come to mean being kind of true to yourself. And in
Yeah.
therapeutic circles, it means acting in congruity with your internal feeling. And this
Right.
has become this kind of transformed into this kind of poisonous notion that if you do something in a relationship, maybe, that you didn't feel like doing, that's like a crime against yourself. It's like a self violation. And this
Hmm.
entered uh, into our usage from this meaning as it was applied to documents and works of art, saying like authentic is like the original or the true thing as
Original.
opposed
Right.
to a copy or a fake or something.
Hmm.
But the original roots that comprise authentic, altos and hentes, altos meaning like self, and hentes meaning like actor or doer. The
Hmm.
authentic
Hmm.
person is the person who is taking responsibility in the face of and despite what Heidegger calls the flungness of being. We didn't
Right.
choose to be here. We find ourselves flung into existence in a set of circumstances we didn't create, but we can choose
Thrownness.
to
Yeah.
take responsibility for ourselves and to choose to lift up the world, so to speak,
Hmm.
by our choices and actions. And it's funny how the colloquial use has evolved into the exact opposite of that, saying, "Well, I don't feel like doing this. Well, where did that feeling come from?" Um, and
Hmm.
it's often very hard to pinpoint where these feelings come from. And
Right.
so it's giving into the flungness or thrownness, however we want to translate the German, versus going like choosing to act on our own. And the philosophical approach to understanding these words and their origins and to thinking about, like, does truth mean all the senses that we might mean by it at the same time, or are we talking about different things? It can help disentangle these very subtle equivocations that are often accidental that work our way into how we think about things.
Interesting.
It's very, very fascinating with this example. I studied psychology at school. I got a minor in it. Originally was a psychology major, but I made it my minor. And you, from the other perspective, see a lot of psychological terms and ideas kind of bastardized into popular parlance, right? And now you have this whole thing of therapy speak where people
Everything is
justify all
gaslighting.
these. Yes, yes, yes. And authenticity is one of those concepts where people develop these whole like complexes around being authentic, being your authentic self. And I'm starting to take issue with the degree it's going to, where it's this idea of authenticity and being yourself, and kind of people will call out online, right, like the LARP or performative, which itself have interesting etymologically rabbit holes, especially LARP. Um, but this idea that you can't do anything that isn't what you exactly feel at the moment, or that isn't somehow true to yourself. Like if you dress nice, there's someone who's going to say, well, you're just being performative. That's not how you authentically
That's
want
not
to
authentic.
dress.
Right.
You want to impress people. And it's like, at what degree do we say, okay, yes, I could not shower, I could not brush my teeth, I could not put on any clothes.
Well,
Is
but see,
that my
that's like
authentic self? Like,
that's almost the antithesis, because the idea in Heidegger, like, and this is something that, like, because I've often found like this distinction between being and becoming, like the Nietzschean becoming and Heideggerian sort of being, and the people think that they're like polar opposites, but really in a sense they're still oriented towards action. Like Heidegger's concept of Dasein is like being in the world. You are thrown into the world without choice, but it is your sort of duty to act. Like it's through action and through, you could call it self-discovery or something, of like your sort of orientation. That's the authenticity is like the being of the self.
Right. Well,
Where
you might be able to correct me on this because you're more familiar with Heidegger than I am. But my understanding of Heidegger was that he was advocating authenticity as a tool, but not actually as the primary mode of being. It all comes down to consciousness and the direction of our attention. And when we turn
right.
our attention back on ourselves, we actually lose focus on the eye that is turning the attention. So we can never fully look at ourselves. We can never fully grasp, but we can begin that cycle to sort of understand ourselves, but that takes our attention away from the world. It's the
Right.
sort of conscious distinction between the hammer at hand, the ready to hand, and the presence
yeah,
at
readiness
hand.
to hand. Yeah.
And like being in the world takes place in the ready to hand mode. It's that flow
Right.
state of almost unself-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And authenticity in the sense of looking at ourselves and our relationship with being and then choosing to take responsibility, all that is preparation for the action
Right.
component.
Yeah, and it's still geared towards, it requires your sort of conscious choice to
Yeah.
move forward, which is that sort of idea of orienting being towards death. Like, you know that death is the finality, so it's sort of like, how are you going to orient your life in the sort of proper fashion towards that end? Whereas like the antithesis, the Dasman, doesn't wrestle with those things. It's like the translation that I was familiar with is it's literally the they, like just others, who are sort of like these unconscious beings who have not sort of internalized their thrownness into the world. And so their state of being is sort of just like flux. It's not flow.
Yeah.
It's not does that make sense? And so it's like, I think it's kind of like what Dane was saying, like, this idea of don't don't act in the way that you want to go, just be the thing that you are. But it's like, what is that thing that I am? Is that just like base existence and I'm not supposed to like try or orient myself towards anything? Whereas like the LARPer who wants to become something, he
Mm-hmm.
orients himself in a particular direction.
Yes, exactly. And that orientation is crucial. And
Hmm.
even the abdication, and this is like kind of a basic point, but like even the abdication of focusing on towards some sort of goal of just being man, being
Yeah.
the dude who abides, which is its own kind of funny Heideggerian phrasing in a little bit, is like that is still a becoming, because
It's
you
an
are not
orientation.
you are not that in the future yet, but you are on path to become that. You are on
Right.
path to becoming what you already are, which is stasis. You know,
Hmm.
um, and there is a way of reading Plato that I don't agree with, but is very common, that because Plato says in this is book 8 of the Republic or so, that the the philosopher king should always focus on being and not on becoming. And this goes back to the
Mm.
whole Aletheia thing, because if it is not unchanging, if it is not eternal, if it is not uncontingent, then it isn't the real capital T truth.
Or the, yeah, right, right, right.
But we are not that, and we change and we evolve and we die eventually. So
Hmm.
uh, the focus on the Aletheia can be an interesting mental exercise, but I think if my memory serves, Heidegger talks about the danger of the plunge, of delving too far into your own mind and basically drowning, of not being able to come out and being paralyzed in a state of perpetual being. Essentially, I'll have to actually get through
I,
this
I,
book fully at some point.
yeah,
Um,
I
but
think you're spot on with that, and I do agree with your sort of interpretation of the like the because like the Platonic ideal of the forms. It's like we're all orienting towards, if you want to use that term again, like the form of beauty, for example. We're trying to embody beauty in ways that we can. In the material world, because that's where we exist, and we can never achieve the true form of beauty, but we can achieve lesser modes of beauty that are oriented towards the form. But it's like if you're trying to achieve the form, you're going to fail. And so it's this idea of maybe call it like nihilistic, of like, well, if I can never achieve the true form of beauty, then like, is this all for naught? And it kind of ties back to the fatalistic idea of like, because like you can read Socrates's words in Plato and think the same thing, where he's like he wants to be detached from his flesh prison so that his soul can exist with the forms which are better. But I don't
yeah,
actually think that that's the case either. I think that it's just sort of like there is a goal that sort of sets the direction that one should go in, but that doesn't mean that you should fault yourself for falling short of anything.
can I say something really scandalous?
Totally, please.
I don't think Plato believed in forms.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
think I think and I had believed that, and I had been like fairly hard anti-Plato up until this Milliman course last year, and in rereading it a little more closely, I realized in all of his talk the word um that is used for form is idea or eidos, and it's like
Hmm.
image, but it's always used in the context of describing degrees of knowledge. Like the saddle maker knows more about saddles than the guy who merely paints saddles, but the
Right.
rider knows more still, and it's knowledge of the thing.
Hmm.
And so what I realized that Plato was describing, that to me seems far more defensible than like an idea of a thing preceding the thing itself, because like well, the first seat was just a stump that someone sat on, and they're like, oh, I could make a portable version of this. Like that
A
wasn't
chair.
that
Yeah.
didn't begin with a
The form
blueprint.
of a chair. Yeah.
But if you understand all of his talk of forms in terms of epistemology rather than metaphysics,
Hmm.
and the image of a thing as truer knowledge than just mere experience with it in some lesser domain. Um, Everything comes into much clearer focus, and it becomes a
It
lot more
it
defensible.
it also ties in neatly to what I have at least understood about solar idealism, because it seems like in solar idealism there is no sort of objective metaphysical belief about the nature of reality. I could be wrong about that. What
Well,
is your...
so I mean, the idea of solar idealism beginning from Odin's throne, from the high perspective of the present and looking back in this sort of scanning across the religious expanse of time and like what's on the horizon, what has always been true.
It's like a
Um,
deductive view of...
there is something objective in the sense of having a higher perspective, but not objective in the sense of the view from nowhere. Not objective in the sense of the view from God or from the universe itself. It's what are the best inferences we can make about what is always true. It's like, well, every successful society ever has been religious. That's a starting point. You know,
Okay.
every society ever has defined male and female roles. Every society ever has warriors that defend the perimeter, and like we can build from there. What are universal patterns? What are, to borrow from Rudyard Kipling, what are the gods of the copybook headings?
Mm.
Right. And that's not, is that objective truth? Well, it's sort of our description of patterns. To call
Right.
that objective truth might be an overstatement if we're being really metaphysically precise. But but they are human universals. Now, humanity isn't all of the universe. Humanity isn't objective at the level of like that people want to ascribe to mathematics, perhaps. Um,
Sure.
but it's objective at the sufficient level for us, because that's what we're not designing religions for ants,
Right.
or sloths, or whatever. We're what are the best beliefs for us to have? What are the best stories for us? And there are stories of universal success, and there are stories of universal failure. And Rudyard Kipling's God of the Copybook Headings is a great example of the failures as well as the successes. More of the failures,
Mm.
um, but it doesn't begin with the idea that we know what is objectively true.
Mm-hmm.
We can't know, and that's part of the story. I mean, man is mortal, and we are epistemologically limited, right? But
Yeah.
we can look up and we can see greater forces at work in the world. We can come to understand them a little bit more and to venerate them when it's due, and express gratitude and respect appropriately. And that begins
Yeah.
with the sun, because it's the sort of center, literally the center of our solar system and of our universe for our purposes. Um,
Yeah.
and so from that sort of aesthetic, iconic starting point, it works out to like, what are the best stories?
Yeah,
Um,
okay. It makes sense because the thing that I was thinking about is like, most religions like Christianity or Hinduism, they might, and because it's obvious, there's different practices in Hinduism, there's different denominations in Christianity. So even though there's a core scripture
mhm,
that the religions are aimed towards, there's still different metaphysical understandings of what that truth is. And
right.
so it seems like, if I have it right, the solar idealism, um, objective metaphysical belief is essentially like the scripture, so to speak, is what you can deduce from the bottom up of all of the stories throughout time and what has worked.
Yes, it's an attempt at triangulation, and there's a particular tone, because like we were talking about before, not all religions
Have the
aspire
same
for this.
values.
Yes, they have a different. If you, we have arrived at a place where we're very broadly anti-Buddhist, for example, um, but there's an exceptional asterisk for the Zen guys. There's something
Okay.
cool. There's something really positive and solar going on there, um,
Yeah.
that we like. So it's you know it is triangulation, but it's triangulation from a particular perspective, and it is trying to be positive and creative as opposed to reactionary. It is trying to be
Interesting.
of the sun in the sense that, for example, Yukio Mishima wrote about in opposition to the writers, the nocturnal writers he described with the pale, sallow skin and the sagging stomachs of Sun and Steel. Not that we're trying to emulate everything Mishima did, but you know,
Yeah.
that kind of vitality that that we find artistically and experientially in association with the sun, rather than at night and in opposition to things. It's the best stories from that energy, from that perspective, if that makes sense.
I think this direction of not being reactionary is such an important force now because, like you said, we are so many of our identities and movements in this time frame are purely oppositional. They're anti something, be it anti a religion, like you said, paganism often takes on an anti-Christian perspective, or anti anti woke, or whatever. People like to form their identity around what they're against, what they don't like.
So what politics
But
is,
it's
if Carl
yes,
Schmitt is to be believed.
exactly. But it's okay. So if you destroy theoretically or overcome, or what you don't like goes away, then
What are you for?
what do you have? You can hate your neighbor's lawn, but what have you got going on in your own lawn? And your neighbor's lawn might be trash. It might be littered with trash and never watered. But that's still, you've still got to have a lawn of your own to say that your lawn's better, right? And
Right.
that's why I try not to focus too much on art I don't like or things I don't like. Especially not without providing an alternative. I think it's better to build something that attracts people in and stands on its own legs than purely orients towards it's not that, it's anti that. But so many people today get caught up in, well, I hate this, I'm against this, I stand against this, and it's like, okay, but what do you stand for? What are you fighting for? What are you living for? Everyone wants to die for something. What do you want to live for?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I actually started doing this Homer curriculum I've been doing now after an acquaintance on Instagram, not even a friend, just DM'd me and he said, "Dude, you've been like being really critical of stuff recently. Is everything okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine, but that's a really good criticism. I should focus on something positive." And I'd already been like a fairly serious Homer nerd for quite some time, but I'm like, I could put together a list of what everyone could read to get to the place of Homer that I've arrived at. That's changed, of course, over the last 3 years. You know how these things go, but
Sure.
that list evolved into a small group, which evolved then into a second small group, and it's been tremendously worthwhile. So good to go through this, and I mean, it's not like there aren't moments of criticism in the context of like, oh, this translation, or we don't like this person's interpretation of the meaning of this, whatever. But it's all
Right.
revolving around the worthiness and the value of Homer in my case, and it might be the Bible or something else for someone else. Even Emily Wilson, in her own way, is still paying homage to the value of this, as is James Joyce's Ulysses and Watership Down and Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and my favorite adaptation of the Iliad, which is Top Gun, and many other stories, maybe all of the
Is
stories.
Watership Down a downstream of the Iliad? I'd
It's the
never,
Odyssey,
or Odyssey. I'd never.
as is the Lion King, funnily enough.
I Watership Down
Oh,
is
interesting.
one of the first movies I remember watching.
Oh yeah,
I was like,
it's brutal. It's rough.
and I rewatched it a couple of years ago. I never got that connection though, that it
Well, and it's
which makes sense
it
now,
will be
but
hard for people to see it because Homer seems so strange and so far off, and you read it and you're like, this weird epic poetry with names I can't pronounce, and they're spelled differently in different places, and they have conflicting epithets, and
Yeah.
the main character isn't even here half the book, and um, but it was so influential, the culture, that once you begin to see the connections, you realize it's literally not just everywhere, it's everything.
Yeah.
Everything is Homer. Um,
Yeah.
G.K. Chesterton, the Catholic theologian, said of the Iliad, it may be true that it is our first and also our last poem about our mortal lot as mortals. And the last man left alive, if the world were to become pagan and perish, would do well to quote the Iliad and die. Um, I do think it's significant that he chose the Iliad because the the Iliad is, among other things, the blueprint of how the Western mind understands heroism and what that's
Hmm.
about. And Christianity is not just the refinement, but the perfection of that concept. Maybe the penultimate expression.
Interesting. I
Um,
wouldn't have thought that you would go that direction, but I think we'll find some common ground there maybe.
but going back to Dane's point earlier about tension, and the beauty and the tension and the inescapable messiness of life, the Odyssey is different, and
Hmm.
the ideal of the Odyssey, what we find in Odysseus, is not hero in the same way. I like to use the original words, and the first word of the Odyssey is Andra, man. Sing to me,
Mm.
muse of the man of twists and turns. Um, so I like to imagine it as the ideal of the man, um,
Right.
in sort of juxtaposed tension with the ideal of the hero. And
Hmm.
we see in Book 10 of the Odyssey Achilles saying, this is the foreshadowing to Milton's uh, Satan, I would rather be a slave to a slave, essentially, a servant to a tenant farmer among the living than king of all the dead. And that's
Yeah.
not a very strong promotion of the ideal
Hmm.
of heroism on the other
Right.
side of death. So there's a beauty, but also a tragedy and a certain naivete to the ideal of the hero, but it's not bad because of it. And that's where I think
Right.
people go um, astray. That they have to make everything either absolutely good or absolutely bad.
Hmm.
And it turns my impression, my understanding is that there isn't really the possibility of becoming a man in the Homeric archetypal sense without passing through that heroic phase. You have to go through
Hmm.
that. And so these two archetypes are not just in tension with each other, but are sort of mutually necessary. They work together. It's not either or, it's both and in
Yeah.
tension. And there isn't an easy, neat way to delineate it. And the way this works out in our lives is like, we're raised in our teens and our early 20s, and we acquire some very strong moral values, maybe political values. But then we might become disillusioned with those. We might realize those were not what we thought they were. Um, and the trick to achieving the man archetype rather than just being disillusioned is to hold on to those values even as they transform, even as they change. For me, that was free speech. Um,
Mm.
I was an absolute free speech uh, fanatic, which led me to very very odd connections. Because when you defend free speech, um, but it wasn't. It was only after I had been writing all kinds of things and getting fired from jobs and like all that fun stuff that I realized and learned that the meaning of the freedom of speech, as written in, for example, the First Amendment, changed completely in 1919. It didn't mean the right to say whatever you wanted without consequence. It
Hmm.
meant the right to not be censored in advance, but you could be punished after you said it.
Sure. Yeah.
It did not protect things like libel. It didn't even protect fighting words. I mean, you could say it, but then you might get shot with a 50 cal musket ball. Um, you know, and so does that mean it was a bad ideal if this understanding was not just historically untrue, but actually philosophically completely untenable,
Yeah.
and to the point of
Impractical.
being silly even.
Right.
And on the other side of that understanding, as we were talking about, like the problem with language and words and equivocation earlier, there is a sense of that there's a way of being, a mode of social existence that is more free in expression rather than less free, that we can pursue. And as soon as you try to delineate it in legal terminology, it becomes dead and it becomes susceptible to all kinds of people gaming the system and uh, loopholes and stuff like that. Are either of you familiar with the French philosopher Joseph de Maistre, the Catholic
I'm
Exactly.
not.
French? He was an interesting character because he was a French philosopher during the time of the French Revolution, who was a very
Mm.
strong critic of it. He just eviscerated Rousseau. Um, and he has a treatise on the nature of political constitutions, where he says basically a political constitution can never be written down. It lives
Mm.
in the nature of the people, in the hearts of the people, and you can kind of describe it by writing it down. But if you take that written document and give it to a different people, they won't know what it means. They won't be able to employ it.
Right.
It won't work because it's
Hmm.
not of them. The Constitution is not the writing. The Constitution is the nature that the writing attempts to describe.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting with the Constitution. I can't remember which country it was, but there is a country that adopted our Constitution very closely and to maybe less um,
Success.
success. Yes.
Yes.
I
Is that
can't
Yeah.
remember
Liberia?
which. Yes. Liberia, I think it was. But that's very good example of that.
It's it reminds me kind of like of Julius Evola, where he talks about how like there's like the physical race, but there's also like the race of a culture or of a civilization, and like his takes on sort of a more practical idea of um, different races having different sort of values or perceived understandings of reality and that sort of thing. And he doesn't tie it to the idea that some races or cultures or civilizations are inferior, but merely incompatible. And that if there is this sort of
Mm-hmm.
crossover of different, like if a civilization loses its, what does he say exactly? He says something like, if a civilization loses its spiritual race, then only like the actual physical race of the civilization can be the redeeming factor because those cultural values are like innate to that race sort of thing.
Oh,
And it kind
interesting.
of and obviously
Yeah.
you can take that in many different directions and turn that into something super, racist and nationalistic. Or you can also turn it into something that's like very just practical and this understanding that, yeah, like Sharia law is not going to work in Sweden because
Right.
it's just like a different value system for a different people that's incompatible with a different civilization. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give it a truth value, but it's simply just incompatible.
I believe that's the subject of exploration in Martin Scorsese's wonderful film Silence, about these Jesuit priests who arrive in Japan to figure out what Liam Neeson, their master, what happened to him, because there were rumors that he apostatized, which
Mm,
for a Jesuit is like, oh my god.
the yeah.
Um, so they go to investigate, and the clash of culture between these Portuguese Jesuits and these Japanese, and there's a Japanese Christian population that they're kind of working with. These Jesuits quickly realize these Japanese people's conception of what Christianity is and means is completely different than what they were trying to
By
teach.
nature.
and just
Yeah.
they just have a completely different understanding of it. And you don't even need to go that far. One of the most sort of tragically amusing story, more amusing to me that I'm sure than it is to most Christians, story in Christian history is the Great Catholic Orthodox Schism,
Hmm.
which
I
was
just covered this coincidentally.
Yeah,
oh
he
yeah,
did.
nominally over filioque. Sort of
Uh-huh.
the straw that broke the camel's back was like bread or something. But really, I think
Unleavened versus leavened, yeah.
yeah, I really think what it
I don't
was
know
a
what leaven means, by the way.
was a misunderstanding between cultures that probably wouldn't have disagreed with each other, except that one spoke Latin and the other spoke Greek, and they
Right.
probably thought differently. Um, Dane, with your background in psychology, you probably have opinions about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I'm convinced with George Orwell that it's true, that our language does change how we perceive the world. And people who speak a different language will see things differently in the world and will process it differently. Not in some absolute determinist sense, which is sort of the straw man used against the Sapir-Whorf believers. But I think back to Jonas, your point about Evola and like what we reach for when we're divorced from this sort of spiritual nature. One of the great
Hmm.
values of going back to Homer and reading the source text of the West, we might say, is it does connect us to our own story,
Yes.
the story that
Yeah.
created us in many
Hmm.
ways. And one of the fun upsides to it is you also begin to see how much of English is actually Greek. It's not just Germanic and Latin and French, although it's a lot of that
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Greek in our
Yeah.
words beyond just architecture and Harrow itself, um, which is right there in line 7 or of the Iliad. No, 4. Anyways, a detail that doesn't matter.
Interesting.
I
What was your take, Dane?
Well, couple different directions. One on that hypothesis. I've also heard more recently, even the idea almost that language itself is kind of like a almost like a parasite where it possesses or ingrains itself in people as opposed to people creating and using language. Um, which I'm not saying I necessarily subscribe to, but it's an interesting way to conceptualize language as like a something that hijacks a group of people to kind of develop itself
Sure.
as almost a supraorganism. Um,
It's
but
a fun way to
also
think about it.
with English specifically, a lot of people give English grief for all of its little inconsistencies and hard to learn for some people and everything. But it is the lingua franca of the world, which I guess is a Latin term itself. But
Yes.
part of that maybe is it's pulled, it's got that Germanic base, but it's also pulled greatly from Latin and Greek. And I have to wonder if some of English success was in part if that's indicative of why English became such a successful language, and either in a way that England kind of adopted ideas from other places and synchronized them, or the language itself was able to better describe the world and create meaningful communication in a way that the Englishmen were successful. Not saying that explains the full story, of course, but it's an interesting way to look at it, especially because so many people kind of take a dump on English as a language. Even English speakers
Can
tend
I
to.
make a metaphysical metaphor here?
Yes.
There's a
Please.
wonderful, absolutely extraordinary Argentinian short story author named Jorge Borges. Have either of you read any of his work by any chance?
It's a great
Nah.
name, though.
So worthwhile. Cannot recommend highly enough. He's a trip. He's an acid trip in 10 pages. Um, he the Library of Babel is a great place to start. The Garden of Forking Paths is another really fun one. But he was interviewed once, and he was talking. I mean, in Tina, the native language is of course Spanish, but he liked English and he wrote in English nominally. I mean, he's one of these authors who writes in like 6 different languages at once. Um, but he talked about how much he loved English because of the variety. And as a short story writer or a poet, you have these very light, airy Latin roots that you can draw from, and these very dark Germanic tones you can draw from. And the example he gave was compare the
Ghost and
Latin.
Spirit.
Yes. Oh, you've heard the clip then.
As
Excellent.
you were explaining it, I
Yes.
remembered seeing it. Yes,
Yeah.
and I liked it.
And there's a metaphysical metaphor there, I think, insofar as we can use language to explore metaphysics, to maybe epistemology rather than metaphysics, to how we understand the world. Because one of the biggest trips that I've been running into just in the last couple of months in my exploration of poetry is poetry not merely as a method of expressing beauty, but poetry as a way of knowing. And this was a very mysterious thing to me for a very long time. There's a John Keats poem I always hated called Ode to a Grecian Urn. And the conclusion of the poem is something to the effect of truth is beauty and beauty is truth. That is all ye can know and need to know on earth. Something to that effect.
Okay.
I always thought, well, that's just wrong. There's ugly truths and there are beautiful lies. But at a deeper level, as I read a particularly wonderful book, we've referenced C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien now, another inkling named Owen Barfield, who I've been proselytizing now for a while because he's so good. If I am interpreting him correctly, which is a big asterisk, how we distinguish good and truly great poetry from mediocre or bad poetry, like how we gauge whether a line works or not, whether the use of a word succeeds or doesn't succeed, is an essentially aesthetic capacity in our head. But the reason that that line will land or not land is not a purely aesthetic experience. Well, it is, but it's not just does it sound nice or not. It works in the same way that jokes land or don't land. Jokes land if it feels like it touches upon and exposes something true.
Right.
And so poetry is a way of knowing and a way of finding, as well as expressing truth, in the same way that comedy can be a way of knowing and a way of exposing truth. It taps into that intuitive capacity to see and feel, to change your consciousness in a way that accords with what you already knew to be true, but had never put into words before.
Right.
And so in light of that understanding of what poetry is and what it's doing, the Keats poem was completely salvaged for me.
Sure.
And it's to that end, the variety made available by English in its very speaking of religion, it's very ecumenical approach to other roots and other languages, which has its own history to it, I think makes it more useful for expressing truth, not less. There's a lot of people who, like you were saying, are very critical of English because, nothing's spelled the way it should be, because it's not spelled that way because it's borrowing from like 6 different languages.
We're doing our best,
conjugate
guys.
it differently. But that variety and that messiness comes with a connection to what life is actually like, what truth is actually like, which is not a mathematical system in some autistic grid where everything fits into its neat hole. It is a knot to be untangled. And we can't untangle it all the way, but we can get a lot closer with a language whose messy nature matches the reality of life. I'm a big chess nerd. I enjoy chess a lot. Chess is not like life. Chess is its own thing, a part where everything is systematic. You can see everything. Real life is more like poker.
Yes, 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 yeah. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. It kind of makes me think about like I've had some people reach out to me because I made that one video a long time ago about you can know whether someone is bullshitting you or not based off of how many Latin words they're using versus Germanic words, you know? And somebody sent me some like 9-page essay that they had put together about why ancient languages like Sanskrit and Hebrew and like all some of these other languages, like they have a more magical component to them because like the actual letters and words mean something intrinsically, and it like it he had a way of putting it together where I was like, okay, maybe I could see something in this. But I think that it's we're missing the forest for the trees. We're trying to kind of find something that's not really there when we say that just because like I've seen people say that English is actually like a satanic language because it's an inversion of these magical truths that once existed, and like one of the crux of his
Magical
thesis was like,
truths. How did they
yeah,
express
that
these truths?
yeah, that like the letter J was never meant to exist because it was like I before, and then there and like the actual introduction of the letter J, it dispels all the meanings of the actual words, yada yada yada, and all these things. And I'm like, again, it kind of ties back to that idea of like maybe for a culture, but I don't think literally. You know what I mean? And I think
Not
that
like literal magic
So
spells that.
yeah,
well,
yeah.
this is where the reciprocal nature of language becomes really fascinating because the language as parasite theory that Dane brought up earlier is really fun,
Hmm.
and there's like something to that. But the
Hmm.
other fascinating thing about reading Barfield and other poets and stuff is you see, much like great man theory in history, the same sorts of people who would say language is like a parasite, and this is another reason why LLMs are going to doom us all and whatever. Um, are the sorts of people who would say that history is all about these greater historical forces, that great men have no effect other than what the forces of history and the logic of history draw out of them, and how history uses them to accomplish its ends or
Mm.
whatever. And
Hmm.
I remember watching a debate, an Oxford Union debate, where I believe it was David Starkey came on and gave the example of Henry VIII, and how basically the entire Reformation of England happened because the guy fell in love.
Mm.
It's like, where's the historical forces at work there? And in the
Yeah.
same way with English, like, how was English using Shakespeare to bring all these words into being? One of the coolest examples I stumbled upon just last week was, do either of you know the etymology of focus? As like, I'm going to focus on this.
No.
It's a Latin word that originally meant hearth. How did
Mm, interesting.
hearth
Okay.
become an object of focus? Well, sometime in the 18th century, an English mathematician used this Latin word hearth to describe a point of convergence in geometry where lines came together. And I'm assuming, I
Mm.
don't know the full history of this, but I'm assuming it came from um, examples in art where a hearth was sort of a center point, and a lot of
The
different
focal
themes
point.
in the art came to a focal point, exactly. And
Yeah.
um, and then it adopted this later meaning of to focus upon, as in our eyes are drawn to this focal point, and now we can focus on reading, we can focus on our work. Um, that
And isn't
kind
that
of
poetry in itself?
it is that is
You
that
know?
is this is where I learned it from. But it is
That
poetry.
okay, cool. I like that.
Um,
Yeah.
the word ruin is one that Barfield spends like 7 or 8 pages on. Maybe not that much, but because it comes from
Nice.
this Latin ruat. Perhaps you've heard the phrase fiat justitia ruat caelum. Do justice though the skies may fall. Ruat is
Mm.
this falling, it's this deluge from above. And it only kind of implied destructive force, but it didn't mean that. And then
Right.
over time, different authors and poets used this term, Shakespeare in particular. Look here at the ruins of this man who like fell off a parapet or something in Troilus and
Hmm.
Cressida. Um, and then it came to acquire the meaning of broken until it was finally pluralized as ruins, as in the ruins of a castle or something.
Yeah.
And that evolution from fall to fallen to the like broken stone remains of a building, is like it would be very hard to reverse engineer that without someone who is just in a particular context needed a word and this just came to them.
It fit.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I wouldn't subscribe to the sort of parasitic theory of language, and also this is in line with George Orwell's theory of language, which is, bad language can make us think poorly, but poor thinking can lead to bad language too, and that's why he always
reciprocal.
He was one of the OG advocates of avoiding Greek and Latin roots. I think that's just because Greek and Latin roots have become more developed, and so much of what makes Heidegger so great is, I think, above all the other philosophers, even above Wittgenstein, Heidegger was aware of the problem with language, and so much of what makes him so difficult is that he's coming up with his own
invention of words,
like Das Mann, because he's trying to break through all the baggage that these other words have acquired over the years.
Yeah, and if you create a new word, you instill that innate meaning yourself, so that your exact purpose is carried out.
Yes, until someone else misuses it, like authenticity, and now it has multiple meanings again.
Yes, yeah.
And here we are back again. Yeah.
We'll fuck up Dasein at some point, I'm sure.
I'm sure it's already begun. Is being present to the world, or is it being present to yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we're at an hour and a half right now. I think this is probably a good place for us to take a quick break, and then we can jump into some questions.
Phenomenal.
Sounds good. Awesome.
So to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you have something to say, Dane, or were you going to do the same thing?
I was debating on saying something, but it was kind of tangent-y and
might have led us down another path.
Yeah.
We can always bring it up after the break. It's our show. We can do whatever we want.
Okay. I'll think about it as I pee and see if it's relevant enough.
All right. Sounds good
to me.
I'll see you in 1 minute.
If I have caffeine this late, I am not meeting with slumber. That is for sure. I have enough difficulty sleeping.
Okay. My tolerance levels have reached the stage where I drink about a pot and a half of coffee plus an energy drink of some sort and still hit the sack just fine. Which is probably not ideal, but yeah.
It's power in of itself, I suppose.
Yeah, a blessing and a curse. Probably will catch up to my nervous system one of these days.
We're talking about how are you drinking caffeine right now?
Well, I ran out of coffee and I was contemplating getting more, but I was like, I probably should not.
Are you one of those people that just you can drink coffee and then you can just go to sleep afterwards? Yeah, my girlfriend's the same way. She actually makes her sleepy.
So a certain level of acclimation will get you there.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what it's doing, it's really just it's acting on your what is it? Your like acetylcholine receptors or something, and it's just like it's blocking. I can't remember exactly what the science is, but it's essentially it's like the caffeine molecule goes into a receptor, it blocks the sleepiness feeling that bypasses you. So maybe as you just get used to it more and more and more, it starts sticking to the receptor less, and the sleepiness feeling is just able to like enter either way. So I don't know.
Very possibly. You're going to be more knowledgeable about it than I am. I just know that I can have a monster and it will make me more tired, not less. I just drink it for the taste at this point.
There you go. The philosophy of caffeine, the metaphysics of caffeine. Perhaps you guys should write a book together.
There we go.
Yeah. Dane, I am kind of curious a little bit what your tangent was going to be.
Yeah, I'll say it, and you can either include it or not, and we don't have to discuss too much since it is getting late and we got some questions. But kind of this whole this idea of language and it either being a parasite, however we want to frame language in our relationship with language. I've always been fascinated with man before language, like what it would be like to be a man with a fully biologically identical brain, but no language, developed no system of language, caveman, if you will.
Hmm.
And I might have even told this story on an earlier episode. I'm getting deja vu. Um, but, and I'm not endorsing this in any way. Don't try this at home, kids. But they're drinking a lot of alcohol over a long period of time. I've entered states before where I'm nonverbal and I can't think in words. And it's
Uh-huh.
only sensations and emotions. It's like the only way I can process the world. It feels like the closest to what an animal would experience the world like just
Hmm.
urges and instincts, even
Yeah.
though being intoxicated, very sloppy urges and instincts. Um, but I think that's the most like disassociated from language I've ever experienced, and maybe the closest anyone could ever get once they have language and once they're infected with language in a sense to
Yeah.
losing language. So I didn't really have anywhere else to take it, which is why I didn't pull the trigger on it as a
There's a
discussion
really
point.
fun
But
there's a really fun tangent from your tangent. We
well,
can go on
for
the tangent on the tangent of the tangent with tango and tangent and touching. But the um, there are other animals that have words, so to speak. What they
Yeah.
don't have is grammar. They don't have a
oh,
structure that can change meanings based on the relationship of the words based in the order. That's like one of Noam Chomsky's big things. But there was another interesting sociologist and anthropologist named Roy Rappaport who argued that the origins of language as grammar seem to have co-evolved with religious ritual.
Hmm.
And so the stability and the repetitiousness of religious ritual seemed to come at the same time as grammar, and sort of in the same way. You can see the similarities there, giving rise to language as we understand it today. But as far as separation from language, a book that a couple of esoteric spelunkers might enjoy is a fascinating book in psychology called The Origins of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. And it's the central argument based on neuroanatomy and ancient stories, basically, is that the part of our brain responsible for creating language is in the opposite hemisphere of the side that is responsible for processing language.
Hmm.
And the corpus callosum was not apparently always as strong as it is now.
Hmm.
Um, and so there is evidence and reason to think, according to Jaynes, that not all of our experience of processing our own linguistic thoughts was experienced as coming from us. In other words, when we see Achilles almost draw his sword and kill Agamemnon in book one, but Athena comes down and stops him, and no one else can see her but him, and
Hmm.
says, "Don't do this." That might have been an audio
I
hallucination.
I think I've heard of this before,
And
or
in fact, much of early humanity might have been hallucinating schizophrenic zombies running around, like philosophical zombies, so to speak, running around hearing voices telling them what to do. That was just
Huh.
them, but it was, that they didn't process it as their own voice. They experienced it as external sounds. Um, Richard Dawkins called it either completely insane or the most genius thing ever written in psychology, and not really anything in between. So I don't
Yeah.
have a strong opinion on it one way or another, but it's an interesting thing to think about as far as our connection with language in a tangent on a tangent.
it's certainly fascinating. I think I have heard that before, um, especially with the example of Achilles um, externalizing that as Athena holding him back, so to speak. But yeah, that's probably something we could never prove, I suppose,
Well,
one way or to the other.
it's hard to get soft
But
tissue samples from 20,000 years ago.
Yeah,
But what is
yeah.
interesting is we do have cases of veterans who get like TBIs, and they'll start getting intuitions about things that sound like they're coming from dead friends.
Hmm.
Which, you know, we can make many things of that perhaps, but it's
Right,
not like a universal thing. But it's been documented a few times, so make of that
right.
what you will.
Very interesting. Well, I think that for one, I mean, I was gonna save this for the end of the podcast. We're definitely gonna have to have you back on because I feel like we touched like half of the things that we. It's already almost like 9:30, but we touched on like half of the things I wanted to talk about. So that's one of the things that we can revisit too. Because I also wanted to
Sure.
revisit your idea. You left a question on one of our previous podcasts about what how do you determine between esoteric and bullshit?
Yes, I'm always curious what people's metrics are because there are so many things out there that I used to be in a more, for lack of a better word, atheistic mindset where like
Hmm.
if you can't explain it, it's nonsense. But then you keep running into things where no one can explain how it works, but it does. I
Right.
mean, that's kind of what electricity is. No, even physicists have a hard time, let alone electrical engineers, explaining like how electricity works. Like the engineers can't figure out whether it goes one way in the circuit or the other. We know how to wire it to make it do
Yeah.
what we want, but we don't know how it works.
I
Um,
mean, that's one of the main sort of esoteric paths that I take in terms of like what I believe and what I don't believe, because it's one of those things where like in the new agey world you kind of hear about like frequencies and like energy and that sort of thing and you're like, yeah, whatever. But then when you come down to it, it's like, well, you can't, I mean, it's real. Things have an energy. Everything is made up of sort of electromagnetic fields and that sort
yeah,
of thing. And
the
like you
trick
have
is in the
Wi-Fi. Like what the
application,
fuck is Wi-Fi?
right?
Exactly. Yeah. You know.
Yeah,
The fact that like literally just invisible signals are allowing my computer to communicate with you guys through vast distances. Like, of course, that's literally fucking magic. And is it esoteric is the question,
yeah.
you know? But yeah.
Geez, you being an electric engineer, from a certain perspective, you're kind of
Just an electrician. I'm not
a
an engineer, but
sorry,
So a
electrician.
wizard.
Yes, you're a wizard. You're a wizard in a sense. You're I don't know what the Mancy word. I don't know what the prefix would be for electricity or thunder or lightning, but um, you're a
Oh,
lightning mancer.
electromancy.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're an
Yes.
electromancer. Yes, of
Gotcha.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Electromancer.
All right. Well,
Source.
we do have a few questions that we will jump into. First one comes from Alexa Sliad. She asks, is there a tendency to grasp philosophical concepts based on age or maturity?
Yes, absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Final and definitive answer. I
Um,
would absolutely agree with that. I could just say for myself, I'm 26 now. I'll be turning 27 this year. And I just made a video the other day about why I think journaling is so cool because I'm able to look back on the things that I thought even just a year ago and like how differently my philosophical outlooks are on life. And also like I am grateful for the fact that I was able to study philosophy like with an academic structure in school because it taught me how to do it properly so that when I came away from it and my views were inevitably going to change over time, I still had a sort of structure to fall back on and like understand the differences. Because I think that the problem that people fall into if they don't ever document their beliefs, maybe they never write essays, they never journal. We have the privilege of making videos, literally filming ourselves talking about our ideas, and then you can literally watch your face say something wrong 2 years later. Yeah, a
done
lot of
that.
people don't. Yeah, exactly. Me too. Like I did it very recently, and just being able to do that, I think, is such a privilege because nothing's going to promote more growth, and I think that that's the beauty of philosophy is getting to like you said, you revisit Plato, you read the Republic, 10 times, you're going to get something different every single time. Um, and it's not only like yes, but it's necessarily.
Mhm. And different stages of life will prime you for different ways of seeing the world and different things to focus on. I think Nietzsche's greatest work and most underrated work is The Gay Science, or The Joyful Wisdom, which talks about the
I've read a little bit
relationship
of it.
between health and philosophy and how
Hmm.
much of philosophy is the rationalizing of sick or unhealthy people, and justifying and rationalizing their own failure and so forth, which is one of the reasons Nietzsche was so ferociously critical of alcohol. And like, get healthy first, then you can philosophize and so forth.
Yeah.
But in the same way, I think the temperament of youth and the temperament of older age inclines people in different directions to different objects of focus as well. For me, there's a funny thing that Adam Nicholson says in one of his books, that people are either an Iliad person or an Odyssey person. And if you phrase that as a question, say, are you an Iliad person or an Odyssey person, where you just presuppose that that's a thing, it usually gets a chuckle, because people immediately see there's no reason why I should be one or the other, but I am.
Right.
And when I was 18, 20, 22, I was very much an Iliad person.
By necessity.
Yeah, I mean, that warrior thumos, that righteous indignation and that aspiration for competition and status is that's for young men, and it's appropriate for young men, and you might need to get checked if you don't have a little bit of that in you.
Right.
But as you get older, that begins to look different. You see it from a different perspective, and the nature of Odysseus and that nous, that mind of Odysseus, that seemed not just kind of baffling, but also kind of immoral in some ways to the very principled thumotic young man. It's like, oh, Odysseus lied. He's a bad man.
Yeah.
Begins to make more sense and to come into focus in a different way that it didn't before.
Yeah, when you have a different set of sort of responsibilities in your life. Yeah.
And similar, on the same note, I think there are some concepts that are maybe best not broached to people below a certain age. I don't think it's very responsible to go around telling 15-year-olds, did you know there's no such thing as free will? That's a conversation for later age. We can talk about compatibilism and things like that later. So yeah, age is a very important thing.
I made that video the other day about the Achilles being the Nietzschean Übermensch and Aeneas being the Aristotelian magnanimous man.
Yes.
And it's like a loose, comparison. I was sort of not trying to make a joke out of it, but just like I was trying to think of like, the magnanimous man is kind of like a knight. Who's like the proto-knight? Is it Odysseus? Kind of more like Aeneas almost, because he's like so duty bound to like his serving his purpose of the gods, that sort of thing. Somebody commented on my video and they were like, if you are not if you are not oriented towards the Übermensch under the age of 30, there is something wrong with you. And if you are not trying to be the magnanimous man and you're over 30, then you're insane, or something like that.
It's a play on the Churchill quote about being a liberal versus a conservative.
Yeah, is that what it is? Okay, because I was like, I've heard this before. He's twisting it before.
Yeah, it's a play on the Winston Churchill line. No, exactly, and it's funny because the knight chivalric ethos of European heraldry was based on a collection of models called the Nine Worthies. The first and the oldest of them is from the Iliad, but it's not Achilles. It's Hector.
Diomedes? Oh, Hector. Oh, that makes sense, actually.
It's Hector. Well, Diomedes is an interesting one. I've heard many 18, 19-year-old men be like, Achilles is a pussy. He's crying on the beach. He's crying to his mother. He's not fighting. Diomedes, that's the real man. And that's very appealing to young men, fighting gods and, following orders and doing what you're told. But there is something noble, and I think the Greeks were more mature in catching this, to not always just doing what you're told and
standing up for yourself.
Not allowing yourself to be abused in this way. And there's actually a scene in book 5 4 or 5 of the Iliad where Agamemnon is going up and down the troops, and he's just abusing everybody. He's just berating everybody.
Berating them, yeah.
And he berates Diomedes. And Diomedes' charioteer is about to backtalk Agamemnon. And Diomedes says, no. He's doing his job. He's doing his who's the coffees for closers scene? Um, do you know the scene I'm talking
Not
about?
sure.
There's a famous movie where shoot, it'll come to me in like an hour, and I'll be like, darn it. But it's a car salesman or a real estate salesman who's just berating the salesman, like coffees for closers, and one of the in the same way Agamemnon is trying to get them riled up, and you can choose to direct that towards the leader, or you can choose to just let it rile you up. You can choose to take that abuse and let it, channel it towards the proper object. And Diomedes was doing that. He's like, no, let's allow ourselves to be riled up to go after the Trojans this way.
Yeah,
It's kind of mature in a way, but it's also unjust. It's also allowing a certain dysfunction to flourish. And there is something noble to saying, actually, no, I'm not going to tolerate that.
You're being a tyrant.
Yes. And I think that there's it is kind of immature to side with Diomedes. Not bad, but there's a layer above that, just as there's a layer above Achilles too.
Very, very interesting. I like that observation.
It's fascinating. You guys stole most of my thunder on that.
So sorry. I'm not trying to be an electrician.
I will say, going back to that tension, I've been wanting to work this into a video for a long time. The kind of the young bucks versus the old guard, and kind of how that tension is necessary for society to move forward. Young people bring new ideas and new energy, while the older folks are tempered by experience, in that they kind of have to come at odds a little bit to roll society forward.
Yes.
So I think even with youth there is that tension.
Exactly.
But that kind of gets outside of the scope of this question, which I 100% agree with you guys. There's some things I'm very glad I didn't read at a certain age. And some things that I read that I probably should have read at a younger age that didn't resonate as much.
Yeah.
But it is
interesting.
What it is, right?
Yeah. But reading Lolita at age 12 is probably too young.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Awesome. This next question is from Jaden8728. He says, has modern religion sullied the old? Islam being codified, Christian megachurchified, etc.
Well, yes, of course. But the question is, has it been sullied or codified or
has modern religion sullied the old?
More than was the case historically. I mean, there are historical, cases of the Vatican holding orgies and like all kinds of shenanigans going on all the way back through that all the time. The Roman religion seemed to be largely a joke among politicians, or just this kind of tool that they would very cynically use at their disposal without really a lot of piety involved.
Right.
And we can look back on that with judgment and say, that's kind of not what we want to do. I think it's easy to get black-pilled, and it's easy to look back at the past with rose-tinted glasses, where the best elements of the past are usually what's preserved. And I'm not trying to go all like people's history of the United States here, but there are dark sides to history. Not that the historical times were worse than the present, but that I think we tend to face the same kinds of problems because we're the same kinds of people. And whenever I run into a particularly old curmudgeon on a job site who tends to look at the world degenerating and say everything's going to hell, I love to pull out, and usually they're receptive to it, the complaints from the Iliad of the older to the younger, because so much of the Iliad is about old men trying and failing to check the thumos of these passionate young men. It just doesn't work out up until the end, and there's a part in book 1 right at the beginning where Nestor is looking at Agamemnon and Achilles fighting and saying, You listen to me. I fought with men far greater than you, and he's speaking to like the greatest fighters in recorded history. And
Yeah.
already, 2,800 years ago or 3,200 years ago, depending on whether it's the poem or the war, um,
Right.
the old men are citing a degeneration in quality. Things are
Hmm.
going downhill. It was better before than it is now. And so we're either facing 2,800, 3,000 years of continual degeneration, or we're facing a feature of perception and perspective. And I think the latter is far more likely. And I think that's true with organized religion. Um, there is corruption. There has always been corruption, and the corruption doesn't undo the value of the thing.
Right. Yeah, I think there is something sort of romantic about thinking that, yeah, the past was better and that what we have today is a lesser version, a more degraded version. But you're right, it would have been seen literally throughout all of history. It's in all of our literature, it's in all of our myth. From one generation to the next, everything is just getting conceivably worse. But that's not actually like reflected in always in society and like what we're like our technological advancements, our scientific advancements, these sorts
Our
of things.
music, yeah.
Music, yeah,
The
it was literally
1920s
one of the
didn't have
things.
Tool.
Yeah, right. And they would listen to it and they'd be like, "The hell is this? It's not even
Yeah.
in 4/4. Like, what is So yeah, it's I agree with you. Yeah, to say the
I
least.
do as well. I think with modernity specifically, there is just the not trick card. The confounding factor maybe of technology specifically in our age and just how
Yes.
much of an accelerant it is, even with language, right? I mean, a word can change in a matter of weeks, its definition totally, in a
Mhm.
way
Can
that
I
just,
shamelessly plug something real quick?
yes,
So
Please.
please.
the essay I wrote in the latest Pater anthology was inspired by AI and the seemingly compounding expansion of technology. Um, and so it seemed appropriate to handwrite it. And so Jack was generous enough to publish it in handwritten form.
Oh wow, nice.
Okay.
So
Thank God
which
your
was fun.
handwriting is good.
Well, thank you. And technology is an interesting one. It's one that Heidegger has written about extensively, and of course, a lot
Mm,
of people in the face of AI are going back to Kaczynski's famous essay on industrial society and its future. My essay was actually a bit of an attempt at a refutation of that, but not without paying due respect to the dangers of AI and other technology, because it's definitely there. There's big problems. But if you go back, all of the complaints about technology are essentially the same. And they are
mm,
a complaint that some new technology will replace us. It will replace a virtue, a skill, or a core essential feature of
of
humanity and
humanness.
human connection.
Yeah.
And this goes all the way back to writing itself. Um, Socrates famously argued against writing because writing would replace our memory.
Yeah.
I was having a debate, very, very good debate, with a friend of mine who sees AI as like the anti-human and like replacing us as thinking agents in the world. I
Mm,
said my view is that like it has a degree of that, but I mean so does memory when you think about it. Memory is
right.
pretty critical to thought, and how much has writing replaced our memory? It probably
Yeah.
has a little bit, but not so much that it hasn't that we haven't been left with new avenues, new technological modes for developing new virtues and skills that we didn't think about before. And this is sort of that rose tinted sort of everything is degenerating bias that we have, where we can't anticipate what we don't know. So
Right.
the
Inevitably, it's scary.
right. And the example I brought up was like the archery replaced a lot of swordsmanship, especially when the crossbow was invented. It's pretty sad, right? And then the crossbow
Yeah.
got replaced by the arquebus, and then the arquebus got replaced by the rifle, and muskets, and now we have these crazy rifles. I have one myself. Um, did this eliminate the skill of archery? Well, yeah, it kind of did. But now we've developed shooting into an art form, and so there are competitions. I went to a
Yep.
2-day course to learn to shoot out to 800,000 yards. It's hard.
Wow.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot of equipment, it takes a lot of knowledge of the bullet, of the setup, of the conditions, and all this stuff. It's a new art form. It's a new skill, a new excellence, a new virtue that we didn't have before. And new technological challenges can, we can use more Heideggerian language here, can reveal new aspects of virtues we already had, or inframe us in a way that exposes new qualities and skills. And we can't anticipate that in advance, but it has always been the case with other disruptive technology in the past.
Nice.
Good thoughts.
What's that?
I was just saying good thoughts there.
Yeah.
Does make you think. Also, saw an article today, or maybe it was yesterday, talking about evolution of weapons. First, territory physically captured by autonomous units. Like no human was involved in actually taking the territory in Ukraine and that conflict.
Wow.
So not just drones blowing
like
up
the
people,
dogs and stuff.
but yeah, like things like actually took ground, captured ground in a sense, which is, I didn't look into much to the article or what exactly that entailed, but yeah, that's obviously an extension of what we were talking about in the evolution of weapon systems, if you will.
There's a funny Slavoj Žižek joke about the ideal date, where the man who has his mechanical way of taking care of himself, and he goes on a date with a woman who has her own mechanical way of taking care of herself, and the two people meet on a date, and they have dinner and they go back to someone's apartment, but they don't do anything together. They just set their little toys together, and the toys do each other, and that's their ideal date. It's a joke, and it's a mockery of the sort of direction of digital connection and technology in that point.
Yeah.
But if warfare was replaced in that way, if we just had our toys that would do each other in that way, that wouldn't be a downgrade, I don't think.
Yeah, it's all relative.
There are glorious moments. I watch far too much footage of that war for my own mental health, I'm sure. You can only take so many FPV videos.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you guys did you see the knife fight?
Yes.
That happened a couple of years
I
ago.
do remember that.
A couple of years. It was a. I'll try to say it without tearing up. Because in this horrible war full of just the most inhumane death imaginable, people just lying down and seeing their death coming from this little stupid $50 machine, and there's nothing you can do about it. There was this moment where a Ukrainian soldier was charging a building, and I don't know how it happened, but he got disarmed. He lost his rifle. And he comes around the corner, and there's a Yakut, a Russian soldier right there. And he manages to knock the rifle away or something, but in some way they both go to the ground, and it becomes grappling. The Ukrainian pulls out a knife. He gets the Russian in the ear. The Russian is fighting back. He grabs a piece of slate and manages to stab the Ukrainian in the back of the head, the leg, and the eye. And the Ukrainian was mortally wounded at that point. And he said, "Stop. Hey, stop." And the Russian stopped. And they just paused for a moment. Just sitting there together. And the Russian offered to finish him off. And the Ukrainian said, No, you've got me. I'll do it myself. And he says, "You were the greatest fighter in the world."
Wow.
And then the Russian just kind of nods, stands up, and leaves, and then the Ukrainian grenades himself. But it's like that kind of moment of humanity, of like human connection in the face of war, like really intimate connection. And it doesn't get more intimate than a knife fight.
Right.
Is still there. And it's like all the drones and all the technology and the sniper rifles and the thermal cameras and stuff, like, does that change war? Yes, it absolutely does. Does it negate that human element, and does it take away the base reality of what we are and who we are in relation to each other. No, it doesn't. That's still there. And
Well,
I had to write a poem about that because my hope is that, in 2070, when high school kids are reading about the Russo-Ukrainian War of 2022, they're not just hit with freaking FPV drone footage. Like, let them see a moment of humanity first.
yeah.
I thought it was a beautiful moment.
It's the moment Homer's world could identify with.
It's a very
Yeah.
Bronze Age moment. That's Achilles and Priam right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's one of the best. Best is a weird word to use. I guess like one of the most fortunate things to come out of like World War One and World War Two is like all of these memoirs that the veterans were able to write about what actually happened, because it's like in a world where, we actually have like everybody in the war is literate to a degree, and they can write about these things and they can talk about their experiences and hand them down to us. We can understand war in a very human way, as opposed to just looking back and we talk about the Peloponnesian War, but it's like, do we even understand anything that was going on besides Thucydides?
Well,
You know what I
that's the
mean?
wonderful thing about Homer is we see that the tension Dane was alluding to. These literate soldiers of World War One, they can write poems like Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. The most just horrible poem to read about the awfulness, the mundaneness, the drudgery, and then the terror of trench warfare there. And they can also write The Charge of the Light Brigade from the 1890s, the glory of death in battle, the glory of dying for your country. And it's not one or the other. It's both. And so much of the Iliad is just the repetitiousness of like, and then a spear went through his face and he screamed and he fell and his armor clattered about him, and he was married before he left, but his wife and he never consummated it. And now, the town he lived in will never know the wonderful silver works, and his family still owes 3 cows. Next story. And just that snippet of snuffed
Reality.
out life over and over again. But there is no glory without that death, and not just death, but the suffering, and in a sense, almost the meaninglessness of the suffering. But there's meaning. There's compensatory meaning in the immortality of sorts offered by the poet on the other side of that. And it's compensatory. It's not as good as real life, but it is something. And it's something worth venerating and respecting. The heroes that make up the hero cults that are the foundation of our culture.
Beautiful. Wow. We really went everywhere with that question. That's like that was incredible. But hey, that's what this is all about. All right. We'll wrap on this last question. Ethan Lauren asks, what is the future of the Western man? What is his philosophy?
Well, that's a bit of a layup. What I'd like to say is solar idealism. Really, I don't know. I've made many predictions about the future. Some of them were right. Some of them were Cardano. Not so right.
We've all been there.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I think we can make educated guesses. We can try to guess the trajectory. But I think the best thing we can do is try to find what we think is good and to just be that. And instead of banking on what we think is like, what is the winning side of history, which I don't subscribe to, because all logic of accelerationism and of dialectic in historical language is built upon an assumption that everything has one opposite. But in reality, there are many different opposites. There are many different
kind
ways.
Kind of like the Hegelian dialectic doesn't just have one antithesis, it has a million,
Yes, exactly. The communists think there's only one, and that's fascism. So if you're not a communist, you must be a fascist. But in reality, there's like actually a lot. It's not just one or two or like a dozen. It's innumerable possibilities. And this is where art comes back in. We have to decide what we're going to make the world into. I think is the more important question. Not what is going to happen, but what do we want to happen, and how do we
Yeah.
make that happen? And we can't
And the
control
philosophy
the world.
will be a representation of that.
Exactly. And we can't control everything. We can't control the world. We can't control other people. It's hard enough just to control yourself sometimes.
Yep.
But if you try hard, you can at least control yourself, and that's a lot. And it matters to other people, sometimes in ways you don't expect, which is fun.
Nice.
I think going back to the very beginning, when you mentioned one, not being reactionary, standing for something, and for two, that we can't necessarily go back. We have to go forward, but we can look back to see what worked in the past, triangulate something, and try to bring it forward into the future. Just like art styles, architecture styles, the Renaissance looks back on the classical world, but it doesn't just copy. They don't start wearing togas, right?
Right.
They develop something new that's based on the flame of the old, if you will. And
Exactly.
I think we can't predict what that is going to shape up as, but we're also active players, I hope, in a sense, in what we're doing now and continue to do. Eventually we can look back and say, wow, this is what we built. But we can't see into the future. We play the game, and we'll see where we end up here.
Yeah, it certainly feels like some sort of great conflict is coming. Maybe it's already here, just in a form we don't fully recognize.
Yes.
But I mean, when you look back, and you mentioned the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not just a period of great artwork and advancements and understandings of things. It was also, right on the heels of some of the worst death in European history, the Black Plague. I don't think we're going to go as bad as the Black Plague, but we might be in for.
Well, they tried with COVID, but no, I'm just kidding.
Right, we might be in for some tough times, but I mean, Homer was writing at the tail end of the Bronze Age collapse, and some of the greatest artwork, some of the greatest accomplishments are not made during the proverbial good times, but they're often made in the bad times.
In the wake of collapse.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we don't need to wait for like an optimal context for the right forces of history to align to do great things and to try to live well.
Amen. CB, thanks so much for coming on, dude. Where can people find you, and what do you have coming up in the future?
Oh man. They can find my stuff at caffeinephilosophy.com. It's my blog. I've started putting a bunch of stuff on Substack. I believe that's also Caffeine and Philosophy.
Perfect.
Instagram is where I post most of this stuff, and I've got a YouTube channel as well, also Caffeine and Philosophy, where people ask questions and I give 15 to 25 minute videos on that kind of stuff too. So yeah, hopefully I'll be launching a more official 1-year course version of the Homer curriculum I've been developing for the last couple years.
Nice.
I'll sort of figure out the details of that around June or July, sometime around when Christopher Nolan's film comes out. But
Very
still
cool.
need to put the details together on that.
Yeah, I think that'll be super fascinating. I was looking at that on your page and very interested in what that all entails. Because I wish that I had a proper course in the Iliad and the Odyssey when I was going through it. I kind of did a self-study, but I think that having somebody as knowledgeable as yourself and as vitalistic and full of thumos would be preferable to some of the stuffy professors that you would find in a university. So we'll have all of your links below so that everybody can find those as well. But yeah, man, thanks again for coming on. We will definitely have to have you back. Because there's just too much ground to cover. But this has been an incredible conversation, so thank you.
Well, wonderful. The feeling's mutual. Thanks so much, both of you, for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome.
With that, we will see you guys for the next episode.